The morning sun barely broke through the clouds as the downtown courthouse began filling with people. It was a Tuesday, and like every other Tuesday, the building buzzed with attorneys rushing to courtrooms, families waiting nervously on benches, and court staff moving through their routines with practiced efficiency. Officer Derek Thompson stood at his usual post near Courtroom 4B. He'd been working courthouse security for nearly 16 years now, and he knew the rhythm of this place like the back of his hand. He could spot an attorney from 50 feet away, recognize the nervous shuffle of first-time defendants, and identify troublemakers before they even opened their mouths. Or so he thought. Around 9:15, a woman walked through the main entrance. She wore jeans, a simple navy blazer, and comfortable flats. Her dark hair was pulled back in a casual ponytail, and she carried only a leather tote bag over her shoulder. Nothing about her screamed important or official. To Derek, she looked like any other person wandering into the courthouse, probably lost or confused about where she needed to be. The woman walked with quiet confidence toward Courtroom 4B. Derek stepped forward, positioning himself directly in her path. This was his job after all. Keep order, make sure people went where they belonged, and this woman clearly didn't belong in the restricted area beyond the security checkpoint. "Excuse me, ma'am," Derek said, his voice firm and professional. "Public seating is in the back of the courtroom. You'll need to wait until we open the doors." The woman stopped and looked at him with calm, dark eyes. She smiled slightly, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I appreciate that, officer, but I actually need to get through." Derek shook his head. He'd heard every excuse in the book over the years. People always thought they were special, that the rules somehow didn't apply to them. "Ma'am, I understand you might have business here, but everyone enters through the public access. No exceptions." "I understand your concern," the woman said patiently, "but if you could just check with—" "I don't need to check with anyone," Derek interrupted, his voice rising slightly. A few people in the hallway turned to look. "I've been doing this job long enough to know the protocols. Unless you're an attorney with the court or a staff member, you wait with everyone else." The woman took a breath, clearly trying to remain patient. "Officer, I think there's been a misunderstanding. If you'd just let me explain. The only misunderstanding here is you thinking you can walk past security." Derek cut her off again. His face was flushing now, a combination of frustration and the audience that was forming. Other officers nearby exchanged uncomfortable glances but said nothing. Derek was senior staff. Nobody questioned him. "Look, I don't know who you think you are, but in this courthouse everyone follows the same rules," Derek continued, his voice echoing in the marble hallway. "I don't care if you're here for a traffic ticket or a custody hearing. You don't get special treatment just because you don't want to wait like everyone else." The woman's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. Not anger exactly, but something else. Disappointment, perhaps. She glanced at the growing crowd of onlookers, then back at Derek. "I'm not asking for special treatment," she said quietly. "I'm simply trying to get to where I need to be." "And I'm telling you where you need to be," Derek shot back. "Public entrance. Back of the courtroom. It's not complicated." He crossed his arms over his chest, the universal gesture of someone who wasn't budging. A younger officer nearby, someone Derek had trained just last year, stepped forward hesitantly. "Hey Derek, maybe we should just—" "I've got this handled," Derek snapped, not taking his eyes off the woman. 15 years I've been keeping order in this courthouse. 15 years of dealing with people who think they're above the rules. Well, not on my watch." The woman didn't argue further. She simply stood there, quiet and composed, while Derek continued his tirade. People walking past slowed down, curious about the commotion. A few pulled out their phones, though Derek was too focused on making his point to notice. "You know what the problem is today?" Derek was on a roll now, his voice carrying across the hallway. "Nobody respects authority anymore. Nobody wants to follow simple instructions. Everyone thinks they're special, that they deserve different treatment. Well, let me tell you something." The heavy wooden door to Courtroom 4B swung open. Robert Chen, the bailiff for that courtroom, stepped out to see what the noise was about. The moment he saw the woman standing there with Derek blocking her path, his face went completely white. His eyes widened and his mouth fell open slightly. "Oh no," Robert muttered under his breath, loud enough for only the people closest to him to hear. He quickly crossed the distance between the courtroom and where Derek stood. "Derek," Robert said urgently, grabbing the officer's arm. "Derek, do you have any idea who you're talking to?" Derek pulled his arm away, annoyed at the interruption. Some lady who thinks she doesn't have to follow courthouse procedures. I'm handling it. Robert's face somehow managed to go even paler. He leaned in close, lowering his voice to a harsh whisper. That's Judge Victoria Hartwell. She was appointed 3 weeks ago. Today is her first day presiding over courtroom 4B. The words hung in the air like a bomb that had just been dropped. Derek's confident expression crumbled. His arms fell to his sides. The color drained from his face so quickly that for a moment he looked like he might actually faint. That's what? Derek managed to choke out. The new judge, Robert repeated, his voice tight with stress. The one we got the memo about last week. The one who's taking over Judge Patterson's docket. Derek turned slowly to look at the woman. Really look at her this time. She stood there with the same calm expression, not smug or angry, just observant. Like she'd been watching a fascinating experiment unfold, which Derek was beginning to realize with growing horror she probably had been. Your Honor, Derek started, but the words died in his throat. What could he possibly say? He'd just spent 5 minutes berating a judge. A judge. On her first day, Judge Hartwell finally spoke, her voice quiet but carrying clearly in the now silent hallway. Officer Thompson, I'll be in my chambers. Please see me in 10 minutes. We need to have a conversation about how people are treated in this courthouse. She walked past him then, moving with the same quiet confidence she'd had from the beginning. Robert hurried ahead to open the door to the judge's chambers for her. She didn't look back. Derek stood frozen in the hallway. Every single person within earshot was staring at him. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked shocked. A few were clearly trying not to laugh. The younger officer he'd snapped at earlier shook his head slowly. Man, the young officer said quietly. You really stepped in at this time. Derek's mind was racing, replaying every word he'd said. Every dismissive gesture, every interruption. He'd called her some lady. He'd lectured her about following rules. He'd refused to let her explain. And all the while she'd been the new judge, the person who would now have significant influence over his workplace, his career, his future. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Probably his supervisor, who'd undoubtedly already heard about what happened. News traveled fast in the courthouse. The hallway slowly returned to normal as people moved on to their business. But Derek knew that what had just happened would be talked about for months. Maybe years. The day Derek Thompson, veteran courthouse security officer with 15 years of experience, berated a judge on her first day of work. He checked his watch. 8 minutes until he had to face Judge Hartwell in her chambers. 8 minutes to figure out how to apologize for something that might be completely unforgivable. 8 minutes until his entire understanding of this job, this courthouse, and his place in it would change forever. The morning had started like any other Tuesday. It was ending like something else entirely. Derek stood in the hallway, his legs feeling like they'd forgotten how to work properly. Around him, life in the courthouse continued as normal. Attorneys rushed past with their briefcases. Court clerks moved between offices with stacks of files. But for Derek, everything had stopped the moment Robert said those words. Judge Victoria Hartwell. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands. Sure enough, there it was. An email from 3 weeks ago that he'd apparently skimmed and forgotten. Subject line, New Judicial Appointment, Courtroom 4B. He scrolled through it now, actually reading it this time. Judge Victoria Hartwell, previously a criminal defense attorney with 15 years of experience, known for her work with underprivileged communities, appointed to fill the vacancy left by Judge Patterson's retirement. There was even a photo attached. The same woman he'd just blocked from entering her own courtroom. How did I miss this? Derek muttered to himself. But he knew how. He got dozens of administrative emails every week. Updates about policy changes, staff meetings, building maintenance schedules. He'd developed a habit of skimming them, figuring someone would tell him if something was really important. Well, this had been really important. His partner, Officer Luis Rodriguez, appeared at his elbow. Luis had worked the north entrance that morning and had missed the whole incident, but the courthouse grapevine worked fast. Hey man, I just heard, is it true? You really didn't know who she was? Derek just nodded, not trusting his voice. Luis let out a low whistle. What are you going to do? I have to go see her in 8 minutes, Derek said, checking his watch again. 7 minutes now. She wants to talk about courthouse conduct. That doesn't sound good. No, Derek agreed. It really doesn't. Louise clapped him on the shoulder. For what it's worth, you were just doing your job. Maybe she'll understand that, but Derek wasn't so sure. He kept replaying the interaction in his mind, and each time it got worse. The way he'd talked over her. The condescending tone. That whole speech about nobody respecting authority anymore. He'd said that. To a judge. To someone who literally represented authority in the legal system. The worst part was realizing why he'd reacted that way. He'd seen a woman in casual clothes and immediately assumed she didn't belong. If she'd been a man in a suit, would he have been so quick to block her path? If she'd looked like his image of what a judge should look like, would he have listened when she tried to explain? The questions made him uncomfortable and he pushed them away. He didn't have time for self-reflection right now. He had to figure out what to say to Judge Hartwell. 5 minutes left. Derek walked to the men's room and splashed cold water on his face. He looked at himself in the mirror. When had he become the kind of officer who didn't listen? Who talked over people? Who made assumptions based on appearances? He'd always thought of himself as one of the good ones. Fair, professional, experienced. But experience had apparently made him arrogant. 2 minutes. He made his way to the judge's chambers, his heart pounding in his chest like he was the one on trial. The door was heavy oak with a brass nameplate that read Judge Victoria Hartwell. Someone had installed it quickly. Maybe even this morning. Derek raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. Through the door, he could hear voices. Robert the bailiff was in there, probably briefing the judge on the day's cases. Derek waited, his hand still raised, feeling foolish. The door opened suddenly. Robert stepped out and nearly bumped into him. "She's ready for you," Robert said, his voice neutral. But his eyes held a warning. "Don't make this worse." Derek stepped inside. The office was still being set up. Boxes sat stacked in one corner, and the bookshelves were only half filled. Judge Hartwell sat behind the desk, now wearing her black judicial robe. The transformation was striking. This was the same woman from the hallway, but somehow the robe changed everything. She looked every bit the judge she was. "Officer Thompson," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "Please sit down." Derek sat. His uniform, which usually made him feel confident and official, now felt like it was strangling him. Judge Hartwell folded her hands on the desk and looked at him steadily. "Before we begin, I want you to know that this conversation is not about punishment. Not yet, anyway. First, I want to understand something. When you saw me this morning, what exactly did you see?" The question caught Derek off guard. He'd expected anger or a lecture, not curiosity. "Your Honor, I saw someone who didn't look like she belonged in the restricted area." "And what does someone who belongs there look like?" Derek opened his mouth, then closed it. How could he answer that honestly? "I suppose someone in professional attire, someone who looks official. Someone in a suit," Judge Hartwell said. "Someone carrying a briefcase. Someone who fits your mental image of what an attorney or court official should look like." "Yes, ma'am, Your Honor." She leaned back in her chair. "Officer Thompson, can I tell you why I dressed this way today?" Derek nodded, afraid to speak. "I wanted to see how people in this courthouse treat ordinary citizens, people who come here for traffic violations, for family court matters, for small claims disputes, people who might not own a suit or understand all our procedures. I wanted to experience what they experience when they walk through those doors." She paused, letting that sink in. "And what I experienced," she continued, "was immediate suspicion. Dismissal. An officer so certain of his assumptions that he wouldn't even let me finish a sentence. You didn't ask who I was. You didn't check your notes or call someone to verify. You saw someone who didn't fit your expectations and you decided that person didn't deserve basic respect or the benefit of the doubt." Derek felt his face burning. "Your Honor, I apologize. I should have," she held up a hand. "I'm not finished. The apology can wait. Right now, I need you to understand something. Every single day, people come through this courthouse who are scared, confused, and intimidated by the legal system. They might be single mothers who took time off from work they can't afford to miss. They might be immigrants who don't fully understand how things work here. They might be young people who've never been in a courthouse before." Judge Hartwell stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. "When those people encounter officers like you, officers who judge them by their appearance before hearing their story, what message does that send? What does it tell them about justice?" "It tells them they don't matter," Derek said quietly. The words came out before he could stop them, but they felt true. Judge Hartwell turned back to face him. Yes, it does. And that's a problem, Officer Thompson, because everyone who walks through those doors matters. That's the whole point of this system. Equal treatment under the law. She returned to her desk and sat down. I saw your personnel file. 16 years of service, numerous commendations, training certifications. By all accounts, you're good at your job. But being good at security procedures isn't enough if you're making people feel unwelcome or unimportant. Derek swallowed hard. What happens now? Am I being suspended? That depends, Judge Hartwell said, on whether you see this as an unfortunate misunderstanding or as an opportunity to learn something important about how you do your job. She pulled out a notepad and wrote something down, then slid it across the desk. I want you to write a reflection for me. Not an apology, but an honest examination of what happened this morning and why. I want you to think about implicit bias, about the assumptions we make based on appearance, about how those assumptions affect the way we treat people. I want 1,500 words on my desk by tomorrow morning. Derek looked at the paper. A reflection? Like a school essay? Like a professional who's committed to growth, Judge Hartwell corrected. You can choose to be defensive and resentful about this, Officer Thompson. You can tell yourself I'm overreacting, that you were just doing your job, that this is all unfair, or you can use this as a chance to become better at what you do. She stood, indicating the meeting was over. Derek stood too, feeling like he'd just gone through an emotional meat grinder. One more thing, Judge Hartwell said as he reached the door. The way you treated me this morning? That probably happens to regular people in this courthouse every single day. They just don't have the authority to do anything about it. Think about that when you write your reflection. Derek walked out of the office in a daze. The hallway seemed too bright, too loud. He made his way back to his post, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. Louise found him 20 minutes later, staring at nothing. So, how bad was it? She wants me to write an essay, Derek said. Louise laughed. An essay? That's it? Man, you got off easy. But as Derek went through the rest of his shift, watching people come and go through the courthouse, he realized it wasn't easy at all, because now he couldn't stop noticing things. The way other officers automatically treated people in suits with more respect, the way they spoke more carefully to people who looked official, the way ordinary people often seemed nervous or intimidated before anyone even spoke to them. Had he been doing this for 16 years without noticing? Had he been part of the problem this whole time? That evening, Derek sat at his kitchen table with his laptop open, staring at a blank document. 1,500 words about implicit bias and assumptions. It should have felt like punishment, like busy work. Instead, it felt like the most important assignment he'd had in years. He started typing. This morning, I made a mistake, but not the mistake I thought I made. Derek spent 3 hours that night working on the reflection. He'd delete paragraphs, rewrite them, and delete them again. How do you put into words the moment you realize you've been wrong about something fundamental for years? He thought about his daughter, studying criminal justice at the state university. She'd come home last semester talking about implicit bias in law enforcement, and Derek had brushed it off. I treat everyone the same, he told her. I don't see color or class or any of that. I just see people following rules or breaking them. Now, sitting at his kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night, he realized how naive that sounded. How could he claim not to see differences when his first instinct that morning had been to judge someone based on how they were dressed? By midnight, he had something. Not perfect, but honest. He saved the document and tried to sleep, though his mind kept replaying the morning's events. The next day, Derek arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early. He printed his reflection in the administrative office, the pages still warm from the printer, and walked to Judge Hartwell's chambers. His hand shook slightly as he knocked. Come in, her voice called. She was already at her desk, reading through case files. She looked up when Derek entered, and he noticed the dark circles under her eyes. Her first day as a judge, and she'd probably spent half of it dealing with him. Your Hano. I have the reflection you asked for. He placed the pages on her desk. Judge Hartwell picked them up, glancing at the word count at the bottom. 1,600 words. She looked at him with something that might have been approval. Thank you, Officer Thompson. I'll read this carefully. You can return to your post, Derek hesitated. Your Honor, I know what I wrote in there, but I wanted to say it to your face, too. I was wrong yesterday. Not just about who you were, but about how I approached the situation. And I'm sorry. She nodded slowly. Apology noted. Now let's see if you meant what you wrote. He left her office feeling lighter somehow, even though he had no idea what would come next. What came next surprised everyone. That afternoon, Judge Hartwell called a meeting with the courthouse security team. All 20 officers crammed into the third-floor conference room, confusion written on their faces. Mandatory meetings usually meant budget cuts or new metal detector protocols. Nothing exciting. Judge Hartwell entered wearing her robe, carrying a folder. She got straight to the point. Yesterday morning, one of your colleagues stopped me from entering my courtroom because he didn't think I looked like I belonged there. I'm not sharing this to embarrass anyone. I'm sharing it because what happened to me happens to regular people in this courthouse every single day, and we need to talk about it. The room went dead silent. Every officer either knew about Derek's incident or was learning about it right now. A few glanced at Derek, who sat in the back row, his face carefully neutral. I've spent 15 years as a defense attorney, Judge Hartwell continued, and I've watched how people are treated differently based on their appearance. I've seen well-dressed defendants get called sir, while working-class defendants get barked at. I've watched officers speak patiently to people who look professional and dismissively to people who don't. She opened her folder and pulled out several printed documents. These are complaints filed with the courthouse over the past 2 years. Complaints about security staff treating people rudely or disrespectfully. There are 47 of them. 47 people felt strongly enough about how they were treated that they took the time to file a formal complaint. The officers shifted uncomfortably. 47 complaints in a courthouse that processed thousands of people seemed like a small number. But Judge Hartwell wasn't done. For every person who files a complaint, how many just accept the treatment and move on? How many think that's just how courthouses work? How many feel too intimidated or powerless to say anything? She walked around the table, making eye contact with different officers. I'm not here to lecture you about doing your jobs wrong. Security is essential. Order is essential. But so is dignity. So is respect. And those things should not depend on whether someone is wearing a suit or jeans. An older officer in the front, someone who'd been there even longer than Derek, raised his hand. Your Honor, with respect, we have to make quick judgments about people. That's part of security. We can't interview everyone who walks through the door. You're absolutely right, Judge Hartwell agreed. Quick assessments are part of your job. But there's a difference between being alert and being dismissive. There's a difference between maintaining security and making assumptions about who deserves courtesy. She returned to the front of the room. Officer Thompson wrote something in his reflection that stuck with me. He wrote about realizing that he'd confused confidence with competence. He'd been doing this job so long that he stopped questioning his assumptions. He stopped considering that he might be wrong. Derek felt every eye in the room turn toward him. His face burned, but he met Judge Hartwell's gaze. His honesty impressed me, she said. And it gave me an idea. I want Officer Thompson to help me develop a new training program for courthouse security. A program focused on implicit bias, respectful interaction, and understanding the perspective of people who find the legal system intimidating. The shock in the room was palpable. Punish the guy who messed up by putting him in charge of training. It didn't make sense to most of them, but Derek understood. This wasn't a reward. It was a challenge. She was testing whether his reflection was genuine or just words on paper to avoid punishment. I'll do it, Derek said, his voice carrying across the quiet room. Whatever you need, Your Honor. Judge Hartwell smiled for the first time since entering the room. Good. We'll meet next week to discuss specifics. In the meantime, I want everyone here to think about this. When someone walks into this courthouse, that might be one of the most stressful days of their life. They might be here for a divorce, a custody battle, a criminal charge, or just a traffic ticket. But to them, it matters. And the first people they interact with are you. You set the tone for their entire experience. She picked up her folder. This isn't about being soft or compromising security. It's about being professional in the fullest sense of that word. It's about understanding that respect and vigilance aren't mutually exclusive. They should go together. The meeting ended and officers filed out in small groups, talking in low voices. Some were skeptical. Others seemed thoughtful. A few looked at Derek like he'd either won the lottery or been handed an impossible task. Luis caught up with Derek in the hallway. Man, I don't know if that was a promotion or a punishment. Neither do I, Derek admitted, but I'm going to figure it out. Over the next week, something strange happened. Officers who'd worked with Derek for years started approaching him differently. Some avoided him, uncomfortable with what had happened, but others sought him out, sharing their own stories. Officer Patricia Wong told him about being a rookie and having a supervisor who taught her to be extra suspicious of young men in hoodies. "It took me years to unlearn that," she said, "to realize I was treating people like criminals before they'd done anything wrong." Officer Raymond Butler, one of the few black officers in the building, shared what it was like being mistaken for a defendant by other court staff. "People see the uniform and the badge, but sometimes they see my face first. I get it from both sides." These conversations changed something in Derek. He'd thought his experience with Judge Hartwell was unique, a one-time mistake. But it was part of a pattern, a system-wide problem that everyone had just accepted as normal. He met with Judge Hartwell the following Tuesday to discuss the training program. He brought a notebook filled with ideas, concerns, and questions. "I've been thinking about this all week," Derek said, sitting across from her desk. "And I keep coming back to one question. How do we train officers to be both secure and respectful? Because the minute someone tells us to be nicer, some officers will hear be less vigilant, and that's dangerous." Judge Hartwell nodded. "That's exactly the right question. And here's the answer. Security comes from awareness and good judgment, not from being aggressive or dismissive. An officer who's truly paying attention, who's reading situations carefully and treating people with respect, is actually more effective than one who's just going through the motions of being tough." They worked through lunch, developing scenarios and role-playing exercises. Judge Hartwell shared stories from her years as a defense attorney, cases where courthouse treatment had affected outcomes, where bias had crept into what should have been neutral proceedings. Derek found himself energized by the work. For the first time in years, he felt like he was doing something that mattered beyond just checking bags and directing traffic. As he was leaving, Judge Hartwell stopped him. "Officer Thompson, I want you to know something. I could have handled yesterday's incident by filing a complaint, requesting your transfer, or pursuing disciplinary action. I chose this path instead because I saw something in your initial reaction that gave me hope." "What was that?" Derek asked. "You looked genuinely horrified when you realized what you'd done. Not because you'd embarrassed yourself, but because you treated someone poorly. That told me you have integrity." "You just lost sight of it." Derek nodded, not trusting his voice. "Don't let me down," she added. "This training program matters. It could change the entire culture of this courthouse." Walking back to his post that afternoon, Derek felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. But it was a good weight, the kind that comes with purpose. He'd spent 16 years thinking he knew exactly what his job was. Turns out, he was just starting to learn. The first training session was scheduled for a Friday afternoon, and Derek barely slept the night before. He'd spent 2 weeks preparing with Judge Hartwell, but standing in front of his colleagues to talk about his own mistakes felt like walking into fire. 20 officers filled the training room, some looking curious, others clearly resentful about giving up their Friday afternoon. Derek recognized every face. These were people he'd worked alongside for years, shared coffee breaks with, complained about paperwork with. Now he had to tell them they all needed to change. Judge Hartwell introduced him briefly and then took a seat in the back row. This was his show now. Derek stood at the front, his prepared notes suddenly feeling inadequate. He'd written out a whole speech, but looking at the skeptical faces in front of him, he knew the speech wouldn't work. He needed to be real. "Okay," he started, setting his notes aside. "I know most of you heard about what happened with Judge Hartwell on her first day. I blocked her from entering her courtroom because I thought she was just some random person who didn't belong there. And before we go any further, I need you all to understand something. I wasn't having a bad day. I wasn't distracted. I did exactly what I've been doing for 16 years. That's what scared me." A few officers shifted in their seats. Derek had their attention now. "I treated someone poorly because she didn't look like what I expected a judge to look like. And the thing is, I would have sworn up and down that I treat everyone the same. I really believed that. But my actions showed something different." He pulled up a slide showing the courthouse entrance. "Every day, hundreds of people walk through these doors. Some are wearing suits, some are wearing jeans with holes in them. Some speak perfect English. Some barely speak English at all. And here's what I realized. I was treating them differently without even knowing it." Officer Patricia Wong raised her hand. "But Derek, we have to assess people quickly. That's literally our job. How do we do that without making judgments? That's the right question, Derek said. And I think the answer is that there's a difference between being observant and being prejudiced. Being alert to actual behavior is one thing. Deciding someone doesn't belong based on their clothes or appearance is something else. He clicked to the next slide, showing statistics Judge Hartwell had helped him compile. Last year, this courthouse processed about 40,000 people. 47 formal complaints were filed about security staff behavior. That's barely 1%. Sounds good, right? Several officers nodded. But Judge Hartwell asked me something that changed how I see those numbers. She asked, for every person who complains, how many just accept poor treatment and move on? How many think that's just how it is? How many are too intimidated to say anything? The room went quiet. Derek told them about his conversations over the past 2 weeks. The single mother who'd been brought to tears by an officer who yelled at her for having her phone on. The elderly man who got lost trying to find the right courtroom and was treated like he was wasting everyone's time. The teenager appearing for a first-time traffic violation who was spoken to like a criminal. None of these people filed complaints, Derek said. They just left thinking that's how justice works. That if you're not important or official-looking, you don't deserve basic courtesy. Officer Raymond Butler spoke up. I think some of us are afraid that if we're too nice, people won't take us seriously. That they'll see it as weakness. I thought that too, Derek admitted. But Judge Hartwell showed me something. She pulled security footage from her courtroom, and we watched how different officers interact with people. The officers who are calm and respectful actually have fewer problems than the ones who come in aggressive. People respond better to respect. They're more cooperative, more likely to follow instructions, less likely to get defensive. He showed clips of various interactions, both good and bad, with faces blurred for privacy. The difference was striking. Officers who took 30 seconds to explain things clearly had smoother interactions than those who barked orders. Then Derek did something he hadn't planned. He showed footage of his interaction with Judge Hartwell. The room watched in silence as Derek blocked her path, talked over her, refused to listen. Watching himself on video was excruciating. He could see his body language, the aggressive stance, the dismissive gestures. He looked like every bad cop from every viral video he'd ever criticized. That's me, Derek said after the clip ended. That's who I became without realizing it. And I'm showing you this not to embarrass myself, though believe me, it's embarrassing. I'm showing you because if it happened to me, it could happen to any of us. We get comfortable in our authority, and we forget that every person we interact with is someone's mother, father, son, or daughter. Someone who deserves to be treated with dignity. The energy in the room had shifted. Officers who'd been defensive earlier now looked thoughtful. A few looked uncomfortable, probably recognizing their own behaviors in Derek's footage. Luis raised his hand. So what do we do differently? Give me something practical. Derek smiled. This was the part he and Judge Hartwell had worked hardest on. Concrete actions, not just philosophy. First, we pause, just 2 seconds before we speak to someone. In those 2 seconds, we check our assumptions. Are we reacting to actual behavior or to what we think we see? Second, we explain. Instead of just giving orders, we take 5 seconds to explain why. Sir, I need you to step over here so we can keep the line moving. That's better than move over there. Third, we default to respect. Everyone gets sir or ma'am until they prove they don't deserve it, not the other way around. He walked them through role-playing scenarios. An elderly woman confused about which courtroom to go to. A young man in street clothes who looks nervous. A well-dressed attorney who's being rude. Each scenario was designed to challenge their assumptions. The exercise that hit hardest involved officers playing the role of regular people coming to court. Patricia had to pretend she was there for a custody hearing. Raymond played someone with a traffic ticket. Luis was an immigrant with limited English. Then other officers had to interact with them using their typical approach. The results were eye-opening. Patricia, who'd been a cop for 12 years, actually felt intimidated by the way her colleagues spoke to her. Raymond experienced firsthand what it felt like to be treated with immediate suspicion. Luis struggled to explain his situation and was dismissed as difficult. Afterward, they sat in a circle and talked about it. Really talked. Not the usual surface-level conversations, but honest discussion about fear, bias, and the power dynamics of their job. I never thought about how intimidating this uniform is, Patricia said quietly. I felt scared, and I know it was just role-playing. but I felt it. That anxiety about doing something wrong, about being judged. Raymond nodded. I deal with people being nervous around me every day. I always thought they were nervous because they had something to hide. Maybe some of them are just nervous because I have all the power in that interaction, and they have none. Judge Hartwell stood up from her seat in the back. That's exactly it, Officer Butler. The recognition that power imbalance exists is the first step toward using your authority responsibly. She joined the circle. I didn't give you this training because I think you're all bad at your jobs. I'm doing this because you're good at your jobs and you can be even better. Every person who has a positive interaction with security is more likely to trust the system. Every person who feels respected is more likely to respect the process. It ripples outward. The training session ran 90 minutes over schedule because people kept asking questions, sharing stories, working through scenarios. Derek had expected resistance, maybe even hostility. Instead, he found that most officers had been waiting for permission to do things differently. They'd felt the same discomfort he had, but didn't know how to address it. As people filed out, several officers stopped to thank Derek, not for the training itself, but for being honest about his mistake. Takes guts to show that video, Officer Chen said, shaking Derek's hand. I saw myself in some of those behaviors and I didn't like it, but I'm glad you showed it. After everyone left, Derek sat alone in the training room, exhausted but satisfied. Judge Hartwell poked her head back in. You did well, she said. Really well. How do you feel? Derek thought about it. Hopeful. I actually feel hopeful. I wasn't sure this would work, but I think people got it. I think they actually want to change. Some of them do, Judge Hartwell said. Others will need more convincing. Change is slow, especially institutional change. But you started something today that matters. She handed him a folder. These are the complaint files I mentioned. I want you to read through them before the next training session. See if you can identify patterns, things we can address specifically. Derek took the folder, feeling its weight. 47 complaints, 47 people who'd had bad experiences, but also 47 opportunities to learn, to improve, to do better. Walking to his car that evening, Derek noticed something he'd never really paid attention to before. The courthouse looked intimidating from the outside. All concrete and glass and formal architecture. For people who'd never been in legal trouble before, just walking up those steps probably felt overwhelming. And then they encountered officers like him. Officers who might be having a bad day, who might be rushing, who might make assumptions based on appearance. Officers who could either help ease that anxiety or make it worse. He pulled out his phone and made a note to discuss this with Judge Hartwell. Maybe they needed better signage. Maybe they needed a welcome desk. Maybe they needed to think about the entire experience from the perspective of someone who found the system frightening. For 16 years, Derek had thought his job was about maintaining order and security. He was starting to understand it was about something more. It was about being the face of justice for people who needed to believe justice was fair. That was worth getting right. 3 months after that first training session, the courthouse felt different. It was nothing you could point to exactly. Nothing obvious like new paint or renovations. The change was subtler, but everyone who worked there felt it. Derek noticed it most during the morning rush. Officers still maintained security, still checked bags and directed people to the right courtrooms, but the tone had shifted. There were more good mornings and fewer barked instructions. More patience with confused visitors and less frustration with questions asked for the third time. Not everyone had changed. A few officers resented the new training, saw it as political correctness gone too far. One veteran officer transferred to a different courthouse rather than adapt. But most of the security team had embraced the shift, or at least were trying to. Derek himself had become something he never expected, an advocate. People in the courthouse started coming to him when they noticed problems or wanted to suggest improvements. He'd become the person who listened, who took concerns seriously, who actually tried to make things better. His daughter noticed the change too. When she came home for spring break, Derek told her everything that had happened. She listened with wide eyes as he described blocking Judge Hartwell, the reflection he'd written, the training program he'd helped develop. Dad, she said when he finished, that's exactly what we've been studying in my criminal justice classes. Implicit bias, institutional change, accountability. You're living it. I should have listened to you months ago, Derek admitted. When you tried to talk to me about this stuff, I brushed it off. I thought I already knew everything because I'd been doing the job so long. She squeezed his hand. But you're listening now. That's what matters. The real test came on a Wednesday morning in late spring. Derek was at his usual post when he noticed a young woman standing near the entrance looking lost. She was maybe 19 or 20, wearing worn jeans and a faded jacket. She kept checking a piece of paper, then looking around nervously. The old Derek would have sized her up quickly. Young, casually dressed, probably here for a minor offense. He might have been impatient with her, eager to move her along so she didn't clog up the entrance, but Derek paused. 2 seconds, just like he taught in training. He saw something different now. He saw someone who was scared. Someone who didn't know how this system worked and was afraid of doing something wrong. He walked over to her. Morning. You look like you might need some help finding something. The young woman's shoulders relaxed slightly. I have to be in courtroom 3A at 9, but I don't know where that is. And I wasn't sure if I was supposed to check in somewhere first or... Courtroom 3A is on the second floor, Derek explained. But you've got plenty of time. It's only 8:30. Do you need to go through security first? I think so. I've never been to court before. Derek gestured toward the metal detectors. No problem. Just put any bags and your phone in the bin, walk through the detector, and then I'll give you directions to the courtroom. It's easy once you know where you're going. He guided her through security, explaining each step. Then he drew a simple map on a piece of paper showing her how to get to courtroom 3A. When you get up there, check in with the clerk. They sit at the desk right outside the courtroom. They'll tell you where to wait. Thank you so much, the young woman said, relief evident in her voice. I was so nervous about coming here. You're going to be fine, Derek assured her. Everyone in that courtroom is there to help you understand the process. If you don't understand something, ask. That's what they're there for. After she left, Derek felt something he hadn't felt in years. Pride in his work. Not pride in catching someone doing something wrong or maintaining order, but pride in making someone's difficult day a little bit easier. Later that morning, Judge Hartwell emerged from her courtroom during a recess. She'd seen the interaction with the young woman. Officer Thompson, could I see you for a moment? Derek's stomach dropped. Even after 3 months, being called to see the judge still made him nervous. In her chambers, Judge Hartwell was smiling. I wanted you to know that the young woman you helped this morning was in my courtroom. She was here for a first-time offense, very minor, but she told the clerk about how kind you were, how you made her feel less scared. That's exactly the kind of interaction we've been working toward. Derek felt his face warm. I just gave her directions. No, Judge Hartwell corrected. You treated her like a person who deserved help and respect. You saw her anxiety and responded with kindness. That's not just anything. That's everything. She pulled out a file. I want to show you something. These are the complaint statistics for the past 3 months. We've had 6 complaints about security staff behavior, 6 compared to the usual 15 or 20 we'd get in that time frame, and we've received 12 compliments. Actual letters or emails from people praising courthouse security. Before your training program, we might get 1 or 2 compliments a year. Derek stared at the numbers. 12 compliments? 12. People who took the time to write and say that courthouse staff made a difficult experience more bearable. That's impact, Officer Thompson. That's real change. Over the following weeks, the story of what happened between Derek and Judge Hartwell began spreading beyond the courthouse. Other courthouses heard about the training program and requested copies of the materials. Derek was invited to speak at a statewide conference on courthouse administration. Standing in front of 200 courthouse employees from across the state, Derek told his story. The whole embarrassing thing, holding nothing back. He showed the security footage of himself blocking Judge Hartwell. He read excerpts from his reflection about recognizing his own bias. I thought I was good at my job, Derek told the audience, and by certain measures I was. I followed protocols. I maintained security. I showed up on time and did what was asked of me. But I wasn't serving the people who needed the courthouse. I was just going through motions. He talked about the training program, the role-playing exercises, the difficult conversations. The thing about change is that it's uncomfortable. It requires admitting we've been wrong about things. It requires questioning habits we've had for years. But that discomfort is worth it when you see the results. After his presentation, person after person came up to share their own stories. A bailiff who'd realized she was harsher with young defendants than older ones. a clerk who'd recognized his impatience with non-English speakers, a court administrator who'd never considered how intimidating the courthouse environment might be for ordinary people. "How did you get people to buy into the change?" one security supervisor asked. "I've tried to implement new approaches, but there's always resistance." Derek thought about this. "Honestly, I think it helped that I was the one who screwed up. I wasn't some outside consultant telling them what to do. I was their colleague who'd made a very public mistake and was trying to learn from it. That made it easier for others to admit they might need to learn too." 6 months after the incident, the courthouse held a ceremony recognizing staff members who'd gone above and beyond. Derek sat in the audience expecting to applaud others. He was shocked when Judge Hartwell called his name. "Officer Derek Thompson has transformed not just his own approach to his work, but has helped transform the culture of this entire courthouse," she announced. He took a moment of failure and turned it into an opportunity for growth. Not just for himself, but for all of us. Derek walked to the front, shaking hands with the presiding judge and accepting a certificate of recognition. But the real reward came afterward, during the reception. Officer Patricia Wong approached him with a woman Derek didn't recognize. "Derek, this is my sister Helen. She had to come to courthouse last month for a family court matter. I told her about everything that's happened here." Helen shook Derek's hand firmly. "I just wanted to thank you. I was terrified about coming to court. But every single person I interacted with, from security to the clerks to the judge, treated me with respect."
It didn't make the situation any easier, but it made me feel like I mattered.
Like my case mattered. That conversation meant more to Derek than any certificate or formal recognition. This was why the work mattered. Not for awards or attention, but for the single mother navigating a custody dispute, the teenager with a traffic ticket, the elderly person confused by legal proceedings. For all the people who needed the system to work fairly and needed to be treated with dignity in the process. That evening, Derek sat with Judge Hartwell in her office, reviewing plans for the next training session. "You know," he said, 6 months ago, if someone had told me I'd be sitting here planning training programs and speaking at conferences, I would have laughed. This isn't what I signed up for when I became a security officer." Judge Hartwell smiled. "No, but it's what you were called to do. You had a choice after that morning. You could have been defensive, resentful, could have done the minimum required and moved on. Instead, you chose growth. You chose to be better." "I had a good teacher," Derek said. "No," Judge Hartwell corrected. "You had someone who gave you an opportunity, but you did the work yourself. You faced uncomfortable truths about your own behavior. You opened yourself up to criticism and change. That took courage." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. "When I decided to dress casually on my first day, I wanted to see the courthouse through the eyes of an ordinary person. What I saw was exactly what I expected, but what I didn't expect was finding someone willing to learn from that experience, someone willing to become an advocate for change." Derek joined her.